Good afternoon. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. This is our August 19, 2021 legislative update, where we are enjoying a nice, quiet, peaceful summer. Not much going on here, and not much to talk about, except that unlike most Augusts, we actually have quite a bit to talk about. Because Congress has been very busy over the last 2 weeks with some very large bills that will have fairly big implications for IEEE members and the companies that we work for. So we will jump right in. First, a little history. Today is the anniversary of the birth of Orville Wright out in Dayton, Ohio. It is also the anniversary of the first day Google began trading as a publicly traded corporation. For those of you who are wondering, the value of Google stock has gone up about 5,700% since it was first issued, which is sad because I don't own any of it. But the big news, most of the news in Washington deals with the infrastructure bills. And there are two bills that are being described as infrastructure bills. We're going to talk about the second one in a bit, but the infrastructure bill passed the Senate a couple days ago with a vote of 69 to 30, so it was a nice bipartisan majority. This is the $550 billion in new spending or $1 trillion in total spending bill. And I put both the numbers in there because the media is describing it as both a $500 billion bill and a $1 trillion bill, and it's actually the same thing depending on how you count. We talked about the bill last time. It includes spending on broadband, electric vehicle infrastructure, electric grid infrastructure, research, workforce development, a lot of good things that IEEE members care about. The bill did not change significantly in any way that we care about between when we talked about it last time and when it passed the Senate. Couple little updates on this particular bill. You'll recall there was a problem in the Senate bill dealing with cryptocurrency. In an effort to raise funds, the Senate extended some banking regulations that include fees to cover crypto exchanges, but they did it in a way that may cause some fairly significant problems. There was an amendment to the Senate bill that was proposed that last time we talked, I told you it would probably pass. It did not. For reasons that have nothing to do with the actual amendment, it got tripped up. And so the original language in the infrastructure bill still stands, which may effectively ban crypto exchanges in the United States. That is not Congress's intent. Efforts to change the law are now moving to the House or could go into conference committee. There is a decent-sized bipartisan group of legislators that want to fix this, and pretty much no one else doesn't want to fix this. So it will get fixed at some point, probably. But at the moment, the cryptocurrency restrictions are still in there. Also, a little update kind of outside the legislative world. The infrastructure bill includes significant resources for broadband deployment in both rural areas and urban areas that don't get good coverage. It is interesting that this bill is starting to move and Congress is starting to get serious about broadband deployment at the same time that Starlink, which is Elon Musk's SpaceX project of global wireless internet, is in beta testing and is apparently doing reasonably well. This is a satellite-based internet system which would be available eventually to anybody in the world, but before then anybody in the United States, regardless of how rural they are, which may make land-based internet service obsolete, at least in remote parts of the United States. So if Starlink works, we could have ubiquitous wireless service across the United States, even without the money that's in the infrastructure bill. Now, let's turn to the second bill, because this is where Congress is turning its attention. This is also being described as an infrastructure bill, but but we're going to call it the Budget Reconciliation Bill. I'm using the term reconciliation bill simply to differentiate it from the infrastructure bill, which has already passed the Senate. The reconciliation bill is the big $3.5 trillion package of programs, some of which is infrastructure, some of which is being called human infrastructure, some of which is not either of those two things. So we will call it the reconciliation bill. The Senate has moved a budget resolution. A budget resolution bill in this context is it's not a bill really, technically. It's a congressional resolution. And it gives the various committee chairs involved in a particular bill instructions on how to draft the bill. We'll look a little bit more about this in a minute, but it essentially says what the sections of the bill will be and how much each one of those sections will spend. Sometimes also has instructions on how that money should be allocated. This is an important step in triggering the process, the reconciliation process, that would allow this bill to move outside of the filibuster system. In other words, it will allow the Democrats to pass this bill without a single Republican vote. Maybe. The problem, as we talked about last time, is that the reconciliation process is supposed to only be used for budget bills. And the $3.5 trillion bill that they're trying to put together is not just a budget bill. It has a lot of policy in there as well. It's not yet clear if those policies and policy provisions will be allowed in the final version. But if any of it is going to be passed outside of the filibuster, thus allowing the Democrats to pass the bill without any Republican support, it will have to go through the budget reconciliation process, which requires a budget resolution, which we now have. None of this means we have an actual bill. Congress is going to have to spend a considerable amount of time over the next few weeks, probably few months, maybe month and a half, 6 weeks or so, to actually write the first draft of the bill. And so we don't have any actual numbers yet. But we do have some idea of what's going to be in it. The budget reconciliation bill, as I mentioned, includes instructions to the various committee chairs on what they're supposed to put in this bill. This is the exact text of the budget reconciliation rules. It's actually a memo that was sent to the various committee chairs telling them how much money they could spend and giving them rough instructions on how to spend it. These are the exact instructions and all of the instructions that were sent to the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. That committee has been given $83 billion to spend. This is new money, so they can spend it on new programs or bumping up old programs. And the money is to be spent on investments in technology, transportation, and more. That's exactly what the instructions say, and more, which of course is pretty open-ended. Research, manufacturing, and economic development, which could be the CHIPS Act or something similar to that. Coastal resiliency, ocean health, which is basically disaster mitigation money. And this is important. The National Science Foundation Research and Technology Directorate. That is the Endless Frontier Act, or at least the heart of it. What is happening here is the Senate committee has been given instructions to fund the EFA through the budget reconciliation bill that they are currently drafting. Now, as you recall, the Endless Frontier Act included significant new money for research, which is great and which will come out of that $83 billion, we hope. But it also included some policies. And the trick will be getting those policies into the final bill. Now, as I said, this is exactly what the instructions to the committee read. By the way, if any of you are interested in this, the exact memo to the committees is online. You can Google it and see all of the instructions if you're interested. But the Senate leadership has explicitly instructed the Commerce Committee to include the new NSF Technology Directorate in this bill, which was the key ask of ours in the EFA. We also want it to be funded. That needs to be included as well, and there's some work to be done to make sure it's in there. But this is how the Senate intends to pass EFA, is to include it in the second infrastructure bill, the Budget Reconciliation Act, that it hopes to get done by the end of the year. Which brings us to the big question of what are the prospects? And the prospects are, I think the best word to use is murky. So the Senate needs to pass the reconciliation bill, the $3.5 trillion bill. They expect to do that this fall. October, maybe later, seems a reasonably optimistic time frame. But first of all, the bill hasn't been written. Writing these bills take time. There is some disagreement among the Democrats in the Senate as to the size of the bill. While Senator Manchin voted for the budget reconciliation bill, which was an important necessary step to getting the final bill passed outside of the filibusters, he also said he didn't like the size of the bill. He thought $3.5 trillion was too big. The thing is, the Democrats have exactly 50 votes in the Senate. With the vice president's vote, they can break a tie, but they can't lose a single vote, which means if Manchin says this bill is too big, he has an awful lot of leverage to make it smaller and to cut programs he doesn't like, as does every single other senator. Every single other senator also has the ability to say, we're not going to support the bill unless it is this big, which I don't believe anybody has done so far. But it means the leadership has very little leverage to force senators to support the bill, because the leadership needs exactly every Democrat in the Senate to vote for it, which is going to make negotiating the details rather difficult. As I mentioned before, the parliamentarian in the Senate may nix some or even most of the bill that isn't explicitly a budget bill. And so until the parliamentarian weighs in, we don't know what is actually in the bill. And until the bill is actually written, the parliamentarian isn't going to weigh in. So there's a lot of questions in the Senate. Things are even worse in the House. Senate has passed the small infrastructure bill, but House leadership has indicated they don't want to move the small infrastructure bill independently of the larger reconciliation bill. Last week, 9 House Democrats said that they don't want the two bills linked. They want a fast vote on the small infrastructure bill and then allow the House to take its time with the larger reconciliation bill. The problem with that is the expectation is if the two bills are not linked, it will make it harder to get the larger bill through Congress. And so the House wants to move both of them at the same time. Some liberal Democrats have indicated that they are not going to vote for the smaller infrastructure bill unless it is attached to the bigger reconciliation bill. The problem is Democrats in the House have an exact 8-vote majority, which means if 4 Democrats vote no or don't vote at all on the bill, it will fail, which again gives the leadership only limited leverage over the final text of the bill. House leaders have now indicated they intend to not only attach the small infrastructure bill to the larger reconciliation bill, but they also want to tie it to the Voting Rights Act. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call, which I'm sorry about that.
Hi, Ron.
So they also want to tie the Voting Rights Act to the 2 other bills. The voting bill, sorry about that. The voting bill is extremely popular among Democrats. And so it will be very, very difficult for Democrats, any Democrat, to vote against the Voting Rights Act. The expectation is if the Democratic leadership tie the 3 bills together, it will be very hard for any of the moderate Democrats to vote no. All of which is quite messy and has a lot of unknowns. A lot of things can go wrong. We don't have text of the bill yet. The House still needs to do something with the smaller infrastructure bill before it can pass. Demonstrating the seriousness of the situation, the House has cut its August recess short. You may recall in our last update, the House was actually going to be out until mid-September. They've now been called back into session on August 23rd to start working all of this out. Betting odds in Washington are still that this bill will pass, or the 2 bills will eventually pass in one form or another. Probably not the voting rights bill at the end of the day, but the 2 infrastructure bills, infrastructure bill and reconciliation bill, will eventually pass. But there's a lot of ways that this can get tripped up, and it's unlikely the bills will pass before the end of the year, November-ish, at the earliest. Bit of good news, I think, coming out of Washington in the last couple of days. Chirag Parikh has been named the new chair of the National Space Council. This is the policy-setting body within the administration on space policy. Technically, Parikh is not the chair; he's the executive secretary, but that's the chair, that person who runs the National Space Council. He was the head of space policy under President Obama, and will replace Dr. Scott Pace, who was the head of the National Space Council under President Trump. Now, what's significant about this is that despite all of the other things going on in Washington, space policy has been very consistent and bipartisan really since the Clinton administration. Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden has been fairly normal and actually fairly orderly. And so the fact that President Biden has appointed someone who was active and a leader under President Obama to be head of his space policy suggests that the continuity, the bipartisanship, and the effectiveness will continue. Dr. Parikh is, he's unfortunately a fan of the Cleveland Guardians, former Cleveland Indians. But other than that, he has a very good reputation in Washington, is held in high regard by both parties, and is seen as a pragmatic leader on space policy. He is an aerospace engineer, University of Cincinnati, which is good. Formerly with Amazon's Azure program, which is their aerospace program. He is also father of the Space Ball. He is a baseball fan, and he's organized an event for the last couple of years at a Nationals baseball game involving kind of the broader DC space community, which I have not been invited to, although my colleague Aline McNall has attended a few times, which is just a great place to talk about policy, baseball game. And like I said, the transition between the Trump team and the Biden team has been very good. It has been very collegial. It has been very bipartisan, all of which suggests that space policy will continue to be bipartisan, which IEEE-USA thinks is great because we think we're basically on the right track and that exciting things are happening in space policy that we hope will continue. One particular piece of legislation to update you on, not a lot of legislative stuff has happened outside of the infrastructure bills in the last couple of weeks, but S2551 has been introduced, and there's a House companion which is being readied. This will instruct the government to begin training federal workers who procure and manage AI systems in AI technology, in particular AI ethics and AI safety, which is important because the procurement officers and the folks that work with AI systems within the federal government are not probably going to be AI experts. They're going to be other types of government employees, but the government isn't going to be able to fill all of those positions with AI experts simply because there aren't enough of them. And so taking time to train them into how to use AI systems, what to be concerned about with AI ethics, and AI safety is going to be critical. And so this is, we think, an important step in making sure the federal government has the expertise it needs to properly integrate AI systems into the federal IT world. Senators Portman and Peters are leading this effort. They are great champions on all things AI that we are thrilled to keep working with. Senator Portman, Republican from Ohio, Senator Peters, Democrat from Michigan, so we have nice bipartisan support in the Senate. My next update will be Thursday, September 2nd. I know I'm a little disturbed that we're already to September this year. We're going to turn to questions in a moment. If you have any questions, please enter them in your chat function now, and I'll turn to them in a moment. But before I do, I'm Russ Harrison. My phone number is 202-530-8326. My email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Feel free to reach out anytime with questions about what's going on in Washington or ways that IEEE or IEEE-USA can help you or your local engineering community. And with that, let us turn to questions. I need to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Question about the non-competes agreement we talked about last time. The answer is no. There's been no word from Patty Murray's office, primarily because Patty Murray's office has been on vacation. Congress went into recess shortly after our last update, and more of the staff than usual have left Washington. Many of them were not in Washington anyway. They're still working remotely. But nothing's happened on the Workforce Mobility Act. I expect we will see more on that subject once Congress returns at the end of the month and then after Labor Day, which is typical. By the way, September will be budget month. Congress is not as far behind on the budget as they were 2 months ago, which is a little bit surprising. They've been a little prompter on that than expected, but we still expect a flurry of activity in September on the appropriations bills. I knew my colleague John Yaglinski would comment on Dayton. IEEE still has a very active section in Dayton, Ohio, focused on aerospace and aerospace research, which is, appropriate for the birthplace of the Wright brothers. And I don't see any other questions. So as always, feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions about public policy, what Congress is doing, what your state or local governments are doing. You have my phone number or my email on your screen. I look forward to hearing from you. And if not, I hope you'll join us again on September 2nd for our next update as we head into the home stretch of 2021. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope the end of your summer is peaceful and relaxing. Thank you.
With the advancements in new technology, the landscape for power systems is changing very rapidly. Information technology has really made a huge difference in enabling some of the things that we work on. I've been able to leverage IEEE-USA to be in the leading edge of my industry. IEEE is all about a sense of community. I am learning ideas and concepts and thinking completely out of the box. IEEE-USA is my competitive edge.